Welcome, everyone. Come on into our Zoom classroom. We are delighted to have you all with us this evening as the rain starts and stops here in Nashville. We might get some rainbows this evening, I think. All right. Creamer. And I'll remind you as you come into the space to please mute yourself. There will be an opportunity, as always, towards the end of our hour together to ask a question aloud or to put one in the chat. But for now, we'll just invite you to mute yourselves. And we'll give it one more minute to at least let those who are on time, my favorite type of people, to get into the space. All right. Well, welcome everyone to the final session in our series, the joint series between West End Synagogue and Congregation Micah, funded generously by the Jewish Federation of Middle Tennessee. American Jewish Identity, Its Changing Landscape, Anti-Semitism, and Israel. For those of you who have been with us for many of these sessions or all of these sessions, we hope it's been a wonderful experience, and we are excited to continue doing this together next year. One of the positives to come out of our time in sequester during the pandemic, this continues to just be a wonderful partnership, and I'm so grateful to my colleague, Rabbi Kolak, for continuing to humor me in this endeavor. So I'm going to begin tonight by introducing someone who's going to introduce our guest, my father, Larry Hochberg, who is currently in Los Angeles and a member of Temple Sinai, along with Congregation Micah. And Temple Sinai is where our guest hails from this evening. And Saba, I'll just turn it over to you to go ahead and introduce yourself and our guest.
Thanks very much, Rabbi Kolak and Laurie. I happen to know Rabbi Wolpe pretty well for many years. Those who don't know him are few, but anyway, for background, he has been the senior rabbi at Temple Sinai for 25 years. And will be retiring now to teach at Harvard this fall, and we'll miss him. For background, he taught at the Jewish Theological Seminary. He taught at Hebrew University. He's internationally known as an outstanding sermonizer. You happen to have a couple people who are good there on our Zoom right now, but he's extraordinary and generally recognized at top level, no matter where he is. He has debated publicly prominent people with both Israel supporters and those who give Israel a hard time. He wrote a number of books, but the one Why Faith Matters is outstanding, and I recommend all of you have a chance to take a look at it because it's quite profound, as is David in general. He also takes the largest group to AIPAC when they had their international conferences in Washington. About 250 congregants would come every year for many years to that policy conference because of David's inspiration. So he has that element, and doesn't just lecture, he actually leads. And he was his principal speaker 2 weeks ago in Paris at the ELNET International Peace Conference, which Bryce also attended, and I think spoke to the congregation Micah previously about it. So we have quite a person to speak to us today. And I want to make sure that Rabbi Wolpe has all the time he needs. So, David, continue.
Thank you. Should I start?
Well, I think we'll start the way we start with all of our guests,
okay.
Which is, and I don't know if I'm putting you on the spot, but I have a sense that you can handle it.
Okay.
We start with just a SWOT analysis of the American Jewish community, specifically sort of the progressive end, reform, conservative, and anything in between. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. How do you see it? I mean, you are, for those who don't know, Rabbi, or Larry just shared that Rabbi Wolpe, you'll be leaving. How many years have you been a pulpit rabbi to date?
20 years.
Okay. So you have your finger on at least a good sense of the pulse of the American Jewish community. How does it look from where you sit?
Everything's great. Thank you.
Terrific.
No, okay.
Thanks for coming, everyone.
I just thought, why not? By the way, I'm gonna make an extremely pedantic and annoying point at the very beginning, only because if there is anybody from my synagogue on this or whoever sees this, they will be upset with me if I don't, which is they insist on being called Sinai Temple, not Temple Sinai.
Oh.
I just want you to know.
We can appreciate that because we are not Temple Micah, and that happens all the time. So I 100% appreciate that. Temple.
So, oh, by the way, why it's a temple as opposed to Sinai Synagogue, which even has alliteration, and I would like better, I don't know. But this has to do with the state of the American Jewish community, no doubt, which leads me right into the subject. I mean, it's obviously, it is a very mixed picture. The brightest of the bright side is that if you go to almost any previous generation of Jews, not only American Jews, of Jews anywhere in the world, to see the modern American Jewish community would be beyond their greatest dreams. And we can't lose sight of that when we talk about all the problems we have. The fact that we are safe, the fact that we are wealthy, the fact that we are influential, the fact that we have all the privileges that we have was really beyond the wildest imaginings of most of our ancestors for most of our history. And against that backdrop, we can say whatever negative things we want, but we really have to begin there because our tendency is to take all our blessings for granted and to think that all of our problems are all that matters. We are enormously, extravagantly blessed. What have we done with this blessing? Well, that's a more mixed bag. I would say the things that are wonderful about the liberal end of the religious life is that we've built very powerful institutions. We have a lot of community structure and support, and also that we have created a network of synagogues and schools and camps and other things that really support Jewish life for those Jews who choose to participate in them. Our greatest problem, and I'll give you a little bit of a different perspective, I hope, from what many have given you on it. Our greatest problem, of course, is the fact that it is easier to do nothing than to do something. And Judaism is a countercultural tradition. And it requires that we do things that people around us don't do, and they're time and sometimes money intensive, and that's hard. The thing that I think we should be aware of is when you ask why are Orthodox movements growing and liberal movements by and large are not, is to remember the old Yiddish saying that Jews are like everyone else, only more so. And that's true in every religion right now. It's not just Judaism. In Hinduism, fundamentalism is growing. In Christianity, fundamentalism is growing. In Islam, fundamentalism is growing. And surprise, surprise, in Judaism, fundamentalism is growing. So I think that we are battling large sociological trends. It's not because we didn't set our synagogues up right. It's not because we didn't have the right attitude towards people who are intermarrying. All those things are blips on the radar. It's part of a much, much larger social question and could change as you know, 50 years ago, everybody said the Orthodox community will be gone. Now everybody's saying the liberal community will be gone. We're not very good prophets. So I am constitutionally an optimist. I think we'll be just fine.
Thank you. So on one end, we have this trend of growing fundamentalism within Judaism, outside of Judaism. On the other end, people like Dara Horn are writing about the fact that there is a trend also within Judaism or within the Jewish world, or the Jewish people, or the American Jewish people, this trend of, in order to be part of something, they are pushed, or they are willingly diluting who they are, because the way to be in is by stop doing what you were saying, we just do more. It's in order to succeed or to be out there, they are pushed to, or they are willing to reduce, so which is the exact opposite of the growing fundamentalism that we see on one end of the spectrum. The question is, for those of us who are closer to the middle, what should we do? Because in a world that loves to polarize and bet to the extremes, what do we do if we want to keep walking in the middle path?
So let me start by saying, first of all, I love the fact that you invoked Dara Horn, because I think she's fantastic. Let me start by saying that I think we need to understand the fundamental problem of liberal Judaism. And if you don't, for my money, if you don't acknowledge this, then you really, everything else in your analysis is going to be skewed. For most of Jewish history, if you asked a Jew, why are you doing X, Y, or Z, whether it is putting on tefillin in the morning or keeping kosher or reciting, so whatever it was, their answer was, because God told me to. And there could be 1,000 other reasons. It could be good for your family. It could be good for society. It could be healthy, or it could be this, but that wasn't why you did it. You did it because God told you to. Now, my guess is, for the majority of people in the liberal, not my guess, for the majority of people in the liberal world, 90-some%, and probably everybody on this call, if I said, why don't you eat a cheeseburger? You would never say, because God told me not to. That wouldn't be your answer. Or why do you eat a cheeseburger? Because God didn't tell me not to. Either way. And therefore, there was this huge seismic shift. Instead of telling people these are what the laws say, which was the main preoccupation of rabbinic tradition before the modern age, now we have to say, this is why you should do that. Because God told me to is no longer an adequate. I mean, if the creator of the entire universe says, don't eat that, you're likely not to eat it. But if I say to you, don't eat it because there's solidarity with Jewish history, or you're putting yourself in a long chain of tradition, that's a very, very different question. So for those of us in the middle, our job has been, is, will be, to find reasons short of divine command, or a different sort of divine command mediated by history and tradition and people and so on, but a different reason than just God told you to. And as every parent knows, the day your kid says, I know you told me to, but why do I have to do it? The game changes. And for those of us in the middle, we just have to keep trying to discover and explain why we believe, and I deeply do, that this makes your life more beautiful, more uplifting, more inspiring, better, that you'll contribute more to the world, and all those sorts of things. And that's our great collective enterprise, but it's not an easy one.
You know, I don't think that this is disconnected from the issue that we feel as leaders today around Israel, and the connection that our congregants, really all ages, certainly younger, but really of all ages, the apathy they feel, and even antipathy towards Israel, it's not disconnected from this desire to fit in, to be connected, to be accepted, right? The idea, especially for the progressive Jewish community, if the progressive is not just descriptive of their Jewish practice, but perhaps of their social values, some of those circles are not interested in inviting you in if you are Zionist, or if you are, in any way supportive of or connected to Israel. So, I mean, would you give the same advice, that it is up to us, those of us who walk the middle path, that we have to continue to also be creative with how we encourage or talk about the value and importance of loving and being committed to Israel?
Yes, but I would take a step back first. And I would say, look, a lot of the attacks on Israel, I mean, will lay my cards on the table. I'm certainly a Zionist. And I am probably further to the right than many people on this call. I would not characterize myself as a right winger, but I certainly wouldn't characterize myself as a left winger. And my assumption immediately, when someone says something negative about Israel, is what I always advise people, and especially rabbis, to think about almost anything that is negative that people say to you, which is your first assumption should be ignorance, not malice. Most Jews don't know a lot about Israel. Just because they're Jewish, it doesn't mean they know a lot about Israel. And most criticisms of Israel are not based on knowledge. And most, I mean, especially because Jews, for example, on college campuses, go with the prevailing social ethos, and the prevailing social ethos doesn't know very much about Israel either. As I always say to Jewish audiences, like, how much do you know about Kashmir and Nagorno-Karabakh? But there are places in the world where that's all that matters, and that's all that anyone talks about. And here you are, knowing nothing about it, assuming that everybody else thinks about Israel all the time, which just isn't so. Right. So the first thing I would do is say that we have an obligation, to the extent that it is possible, to listen and then to educate. And I say to listen first because nobody wants to be educated who hasn't been listened to, not any adult. And there are reasons why people have a hard time with Israel. It's not like Israel is this perfect paragon of virtue that has no demerits and no blots on its record. And so when somebody either says something anti-Semitic or says something anti-Israel, I want to know first, where does that come from? Why do you think that? But then, yeah, it's a giant program of education, and as you know, it's not at the moment, I would say, a battle that we're winning.
So building on that, it's like much of what people say sometimes is based out of ignorance, or it could be based out of we are spoken through our cultural milieu, and we don't even necessarily even understand what we are saying. And again, in this world of polarizing extremes, the question is, many times what people are talking is the bullet points of whatever political ground they are standing, with less and less room for people who are not defining themselves as right wing or left wing, which is, it is becoming increasingly hard for those of us in that position.
Yeah.
The question I would have for you is, what should be the role of politics in the pulpit, or how to navigate? It's like if you were waiting for like very easy questions, it's the next Zoom.
No, I love this question because I've gotten in public debates about this question.
I know.
So let's put Israel aside for a minute, okay? I promise I'll come back to it. Other than Israel, I think politics does not have a place on the pulpit. I really believe that, and I believe it for a couple of reasons. One is I have never met a rabbi ever, and I've spoken to many of them, and I've asked this question, who, when I say, tell me what you believe as a person, that you would vote for as a person, but because the Torah has a certain verse or the rabbis have a certain teaching, you get up and you preach the opposite. And miraculously, everybody discovers that what they believe politically, the Torah also teaches. By which I understand that when someone preaches politics from the Torah, what they're doing is they're taking their politics and using those verses in the Torah that support it. And miraculously, the Torah becomes the politics of the rabbi who is sermonized. So one is, I think that it is the illegitimate arrogation of authority from one area to the other. Because if I get up, for example, and talk about gun control, now I happen to have feelings about gun control, and I'm happy to tell you what they are, but I'll tell you why I don't give a sermon about it. Because I have people in my congregation who know as much about gun control or more than I do. And for me to get up and pretend that the Torah takes a position on gun control, as opposed to David Wolpe takes a position on gun control, I'm using the pulpit as a bully pulpit. That's not what it's supposed to be. I can talk about the tragedies and how our society has to figure out a way out of the tragedy, and how it seems to me that the easy availability of guns is a frightening thing, and we have to figure this out together or whatever, something like that. But I can't talk about policy to a group of very educated people who know it as well as I do. That's one. So one reason is that the rabbi's no special expert on these things. And two is that the Torah is not supposed to be used to advance your own views without acknowledging. So I gave a class, for example, in New York several years ago, where the class took a bunch of issues: women's rights, immigration, abortion, gun control, several other issues, and I showed them the sources on both sides. That was the whole class. It was, you have these arguments over here and you have these arguments over there. And you should know as a Jew, if you take a position, that this is the part of the tradition that you're adhering to, and this is the part of the tradition that you've decided is not as legitimate. The other reason I don't like politics in the pulpit is I have a divided congregation, and I like having a divided congregation. The day I say that politician is a scoundrel, which is something that I believe about certain politicians, but that's a separate issue. But the day I say that from the pulpit, what have I just told them? I've just put either an R or a D above my synagogue, Republican or Democrat, and let them know that nobody of the opposite party is really welcome, because we think that your views are essentially immoral. And that's awful to have synagogues so politically homogenous. You want people of different views in your synagogue. And the only way to have people of different views is not to let them know in advance from the pulpit that someone of this view is a no-goodnik because you believe in a scoundrel. And lastly, the one other part of the political thing that I'll say, which is I've been helped in this a lot by the fact that about 60% of my congregation is from Iran. And and the good thing about having a congregation from another country is it helps you learn a little intellectual humility. Because they'll say to me, very legitimately, you know, Rabbi, you grew up in Philadelphia. And if you grow up in Philadelphia, you have a certain view of the world. I understand that. But you have to understand that I grew up in Tehran. And if you grow up in Tehran, you don't see the world the same way as if you grew up in Philadelphia. So I'm not asking you to agree with me, but I'm asking you to understand that it is possible to see the world differently because you have a different experience of life. And I think that that's really important. So as far as I'm concerned, politics should be to a minimum. Oh, I'll make one final comment about this. I made a last one, now a final one. The other point is, it's too easy. When you give a sermon about politics, everybody either agrees with you and cheers you on, or they get upset, but you're not challenging anyone to change their life. You want to give sermons that actually challenge people to change their ideas or their life. And you have to do that by entering into something with them. So I think it's much harder to get somebody to be kinder than it is to get them to agree with you on a public issue. And agreeing with you on a public issue doesn't change how much tzedakah you give or how kind you are to your children or to your spouse. And that's what I feel like we're in the business primarily to do. Now, I said that I would leave Israel aside. For Israel, I don't feel that way, because I think Israel is, for Jews, a religious issue as well as a political issue. And again, right, left, okay, but I think to be a supporter of the state of Israel and to want Israel to be strong, whether you think that's by having a right-wing government or a left-wing government, but your intent is to have a strong Israel, that I think is a religious imperative for Jews.
Thank you. I was enchanted to listen, and really the word was enchanted, to a sermon that you gave. I'm married to a rabbi, and he had listened to, I want to say it was like your farewell Yom Kippur sermon that you gave. And you talked about, I'd love for you to share a little bit with this group, because when I think back to it, I think, you talked about what it's like to be an introvert and yet to be a pulpit rabbi and to have to extend yourself pastorally and socially in this role. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about the challenges from your perspective about meeting the needs of your members and congregants and how you balanced it, or maybe didn't balance it.
So I mean, that the sermon was in part, first of all, the sermon, I spoke about the fact that I'm not sure I didn't use the word introvert. And the reason I didn't was because I'm not sure that captures what I am. What I am is someone who's often oblivious. I live in books and in ideas. And I walk by people and don't realize that I've just walked by them, and they think, what a jerk. He didn't even say, he saw me, but didn't say hello to me, when in fact they don't realize I barely. And one of the stories I told, there were so many from my history that would tell you what I'm like. But the story I told was when I was a kid, and we lived in Philadelphia, and we were going down to the Jersey Shore. And I wasn't a little kid. I was like 11, 12 years old. My mother said, put the groceries in the trunk, and I did. And we went down to the shore, and she opened the car, and there were no groceries.
Yeah.
And she said, did you put the groceries in? I said, yes. She said, in this car?
Yeah.
Now, it's a 2-hour drive. I was the kind of kid who for 2 hours didn't notice that I put groceries in the other car, and got out of the car and still didn't notice until they weren't there. So that's still true. In fact, yesterday,
Well, you're
2
taking
days
that,
ago,
Rabbi,
2 days ago.
that's it.
What's that?
I'm not sure it matters how, well, go ahead. You finish, and then.
I was saying 2 days ago, I was walking up the walkway to my house, and there's an old lady who often sits on the steps who's sick. And so I said to her, how are you doing? Fine, and so on. And then I was almost to my door when I realized that her caretaker was sitting with her, and I hadn't even acknowledged her caretaker. I'd just spoken to her. So I walked back down, and I thanked her caretaker for taking such good care of her. But a more aware human being would have seen two people there. And I've done that to my congregants in different ways at different times. I've had people say to me, I told you my husband was in the hospital. I came up to you on Shabbos and I said it, and they probably did. And I forgot, and I didn't write it down, and I never called, because that's me. I went home and I thought about the Torah portion or whatever. As a result, I know that I've hurt people along the way. And it's why I started off by being a professor rather than a pulpit rabbi. And when I go back to it, I will feel a certain amount of relief that I don't have quite the same constant pressure to take care of human need, because human need is endless and I'm limited. But I would say those, for me, those things were the hardest part of the rabbinate, are the hardest part of the rabbinate. You want a sermon? I push a button. Like there's something in me that always has stuff to talk about. But if you want to make sure that I'm there pastorally, I really have to work at that. Now, I don't regret it. I've grown tremendously, but I regret some of the pain I caused by not being as present as I would be if I were a different person.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. I mean, the sermon's wonderful, and people can go and listen to it at the Sinai Temple archive online.
Right, exactly.
Sinai Temple. But I was going to say, whether or not it was because you were introverted, or you live in books and ideas, or for whatever reason, it almost doesn't matter, right? To the person who feels that the attention wasn't 100% given in that moment.
Right.
And that pressure is, I think, really, really hard and unrelenting. And yet also one of the magical parts of this profession, but also one of the more difficult parts. So
I think that it's important what you said, that it is also a magical part, because when you do show up, the power of presence is almost unimaginable.
Yeah.
I mean, you have people who say, you know, you don't remember, Rabbi, but 20 years ago, you came and saw me in the hospital, and I will never forget that. And you realize that all those times that you pushed yourself, you know, it's also the actual doing of it is very powerful. Like, I love actually doing weddings. I just don't love leaving my house to have to do it. It's really true. But when I'm at the wedding and I get to talk to the couple, it's great. I mean, who doesn't want to be able to do that? But if you said to me, do you want to do a wedding tonight? I would say, please no.
Okay. Rabbi Kolek, I don't mean to, first of all, I hope you're okay, Rabbi Wolpe.
I have a lingering cough throat thing. It's fine, but it just won't quite go away. Sorry.
It seems to be circulating here in Nashville too. So, Rabbi Kolek, I'll pass to you, and I do have another question, but I'm happy to wait my turn.
No, I was going to follow up on this question, and given that, you know, you have a very close relationship with books, we can see some of them behind you. You know, I certainly resonate with some of that. I have some of those too.
I can see.
Yes. So certainly what you say particularly resonates with me. And you are now going to teach for the next year in the Northeast. So like, my question would be, what are you going to miss the most from being a pulpit rabbi?
I don't know, because I'm not good, like people like me in general, I'm not good at forefeeling. That is, I'm not good at figuring out what I will feel later, because I don't have a lot of, because I'm not very introspective. I introspect by speaking or by teaching, but I know this is weird, but I never just sit there and think. I can't just sit there. I have to like read a book or watch something or be talking to someone. And so I think, but if I had to guess, I would guess maybe I will miss, I'll probably miss, I'll miss some of the people, and I'll miss the chance every week to be able to put my thoughts into some kind of shape to figure out what I think about things.
I thought for sure you'd say you'd miss, you know, being engaged in a capital for your synagogue. Thought that would be the first.
Well, that's true. Good point.
Yeah.
Fundraising, because what rabbi doesn't love to raise money?
I know that would be what I leave behind. I'll be the most sad about. So I'm going to make a not very graceful pivot to this topic of anti-Semitism as it relates to Jewish identity. You know, sadly, it's in the moments when we, at least here in Nashville, we feel threatened as a community, that we are the most connected or reconnected, that we come together. And, you know, I don't know if it's, obviously the ADL and stats that are out there with regards to the uptick in anti-Semitism over the last few years. And we know the increasing polarization politically in our country, and that has sort of stoked the flames and the coals underneath this hardly new reality of anti-Semitism. But I wonder if the concern is more grave than it has been in the past, or if our accessibility to stories and the statistics, the details behind each statistic, because of our interconnectedness technologically, social media, makes it seem as though it's an issue that's growing by leaps and bounds now more than ever. I'm just curious your perspective. I mean, is this one of those sort of hamster wheel sorts of things where anti-Semitism is thousands of years old? It will be double that in another 2,000 years, and we've persevered once before, we'll continue to do so now? Or is there a new alarm in your perspective, from your perspective?
Well, so I just started to work with the ADL. I'm going to be their first rabbinic fellow, and I did it in part because I do think it's different, but I want to start off with a reassuring note, which is America is genuinely different from any of the countries that have come before it in terms of the Jews. And the reason it's different is not because Americans are nicer human beings or because we have a constitution. That's all true, but I mean, not that they're nicer, it's true that we have a constitution, but that doesn't matter. Other countries have constitutions and it doesn't make a difference. What is different about America is for most of Jewish history, we were the identified other. There were Germans and Jews. There were Frenchmen and Jews. There were Russians and Jews. There aren't Americans and Jews, right? Americans come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes and flavors and religions. And the identified other, to the extent that there is one, in America is African Americans, not Jews. So, so that should be reassuring. I think anti-Semitism is growing, and part of the reason it's growing is because of the waning memory of the Holocaust. But the principal reason, at least to me, is social media, which takes hates and takes hates and vastly multiplies them and supercharges them and makes it much, much harder to get a handle on them. And so, yeah, I think it is different. I'm not sure exactly how to counteract that. Nobody is, but we're working on it.
Yeah. Rabbi.
Yes. Again, I think that maybe at this point we can open for some questions from public and see if folks here have, some questions for Rabbi Wolpe.
Yeah, so we'll ask that you can either put up your actual hand or the hand on your Zoom screen. Both count. So Lorna, we'll start with you.
I just wanted to welcome Rabbi Wolpe. I remember sitting in the library at West End Synagogue about 25 years ago, talking with you.
Wow.
And we appreciated you then, and we appreciate you now.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Rabbi Wolpe, one of our community members, Betty Slotchever. Betty, are you listening? Can you unmute yourself? Betty is a member of our community. She is 92 years young.
Unmute myself. Yes.
There you are. And Betty was in the office today. And what did you tell me, Betty?
Rabbi Gerald Wolpe married us. That was his first wedding in Charleston, South Carolina.
Those are my roots.
1955. And
September
when we
what?
were September 7th,
Got it.
1955. He was just was he just getting out of the Navy then?
Yes.
And he had this gig at a conservative synagogue in Charleston. And
was
that's
there for
where
2 or 3 years. Yep.
yeah. And when my husband and I did a show in Philadelphia, we were in the synagogue. We had no idea. We were walking around the halls and we saw that plaque on the wall, Rabbi Gerald Wolpe Emergence, right?
Yeah.
And we knocked on the door and he answered, and he was just thrilled to death. And he brought his wife, and we took pictures. We had a lovely, lovely get together. What a beautiful man! You should be proud.
He was a beautiful man and a wonderful man, and I was very lucky. And I will tell you, the only thing I can say about Charleston, I have 2 older brothers. One was born in Camp Lejeune in the Marines. When they were in the Marines, my second brother was born in Charleston. My only claim to Charleston is I was conceived there. But I was actually born in Harrisburg a few months later when my father moved to Harrisburg. So,
And I'm sure, Betty, that he was very excited to leave the house and come do yours and Irv's wedding.
Oh, he had no choice.
Thank you, Betty. All right.
He actually called us into the library very quietly, and he said to us, "Do you have to get married?" Think about that.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Betty. I see Faith and Ron. There's a hand up in your box. I don't know which one of you.
Hey, first of all, it's delightful to have you on this call. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
I
Sure.
read everything I can of yours.
Thank you.
Here's a question I have been asked more than once. I'd love to hear your response to it.
Mhm.
Question goes, if I am really critical of what's going on in Israel, does that make me an anti-Semite?
No, of course not. But there are ways of being critical that are anti-Semitic in their critique. If, for example, you say Israel is a racist colonialist state or Israel commits genocide, those are critiques that smack of anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
A lot of it has to do with the tone and the intent, but I'm critical of Israel sometimes. So I think that it's a little bit, I mean, if you say, for example, Israel's the #1 problem in the world, that smacks in a world where there is, China and North Korea, yeah, that smacks a little bit of anti-Semitism. So, but if you say, for example, as a lot of Israelis are saying now, there are racists in the Israeli cabinet, I think it's pretty hard to say no to that. Or that there are people who are homophobic in the Israeli cabinet. Well, Smotrich said that about himself, so it's hard to say that's not true. But those are all also. I would say that the Jewish community generally has a pretty good feel for critiques that are I'm not talking about the fringes of the Jewish community, but in general. Like, for example, what Elon Musk said about George Soros, that critique had anti-Semitic overtones. Do I think that Musk is an anti-Semite? No. That's different from saying that his critique had anti-Semitic overtones. So you have to be careful, but as a general rule, can you be anti-Israel in some form without being anti-Semitic? Yeah, I think.
Let me follow there, because it was interesting now that what happened with Elon Musk, and then anti-Semitism, even if he's not necessarily an anti-Semite, but then we had people in the Israeli government, Amichai Chikli among others, saying he was right. And so the question is, given all these elements that are part of the government right now, how can we, or what would be the best way to make a case for Israel when so many of our own members, sometimes ourselves, but members of our congregations, feel completely expelled from the ethos of the Israel that is being built or projected by the current government. The government is not forever, but at the same time, Netanyahu has been there long enough. So
yeah, but why? So why don't they identify with the hundreds of thousands of protesters that are on the streets every single day? And that seems to me the most single greatest demonstration of democracy, at least that I have ever seen in my lifetime. So if you want to pick the part of Israel that you don't like and say therefore it estranges you from everything, I think it's a shame.
No, I agree. Again, for people who like Israel or grew up loving Israel, it's heartbreaking. The challenge is that love is not necessarily passed to the next generation just
right,
and so that creates a challenge.
That is absolutely true. Look, part of what I would say to them is, unfortunately, extremism begets extremism, and when you have an implacable enemy over a long period of time, it begets extremism. And the fact that you have now the Abraham Accords, I think, will eventually exercise a moderating influence on the government, because the Arab governments are not going to want to deal with a government that they feel is too right-wing. So we will see. In the meantime, the judicial reform didn't go through. and isn't going to go through the way that it was originally proposed. It's an interesting, we'll see, it's an interesting political drama going on right now.
Swinging the pendulum just a bit, Rabbi, we'll be moving away from Israel. You commented earlier in our session that for those of us who kind of walk that middle path, not disconnected and not fundamentalist, it's finding and conveying the value, the added life value of being a Jew and being a practicing Jew, whatever practicing means, however one defines it. And I'm curious for you, at this stage of your life, what is, if you could sort of package the value added? It's probably difficult for you to disconnect your being from being Jewish, but for you, just not as Rabbi David Wolpe, but as David Wolpe Jew, what is it for you?
I would say the same. Many years ago, I wrote a book called Why Be Jewish? And my answer would be more or less the same. It's to join a community, to grow your soul, and to seek God. Those are the three things that the Jewish community, the Jewish tradition is the oldest continuous tradition in the world that teaches people how to grow their souls. The community is remarkable. I remember years ago, I had a brain tumor many years ago. And so I had friends who were English Catholics and their father had a brain tumor, and they called me and they said, who do we call and what do we do? And so I put them in touch with the doctor that I had spoken to and some other people. And they called me like a month or two later and they said, you Jews, you're amazing. Once you put us in the network, it's like every doctor in the world was calling us and checking with us. And we have nothing like this. And, Jews tend to take that for granted, how every Jew, has a doctor and a specialist and tell you who to go to. And I'm in the synagogue. We've, been feeding people who are bereaved for months, sometimes for years. So I would say, in addition to growing your own soul, joining a remarkable community, and then we have a lot of intuitions about transcendence, a lot of ideas about what this world is beyond this world, and Judaism is an inexhaustible mine of wisdom about both life as it is lived and also life beyond what is lived, and all those things, whether I were a rabbi or not, I think I would find incredibly important.
And without putting you too much on the spot,
that's okay.
If somebody were to say to you, either Rabbi or just David, or both, explain to me what God is for you, what would you say?
I would say, I would quote Buber, first of all, that God can't be expressed, only addressed. That is, that you can speak to God, but anything you say about God is by very definition inadequate. And so I can help you find your way to some sense of God, but I can't do that by describing to you what God is.
Thank you.
Sure.
Judy has a
Judy.
question. Yeah.
Last night I was at a forum on gun safety it was held in a Christian church here in town with probably 400 people in attendance.
Is that Senator Frist? Judy?
Pardon?
Was that
What?
Senator Frist?
Yeah. So there was a Senator Frist, former Senator Frist, a health professional, and the pastor of the church were the speakers. The one thing that the pastor said at the end, and I'm questioning how we can do this in the Jewish community, is it was a call for civility. And I know within our Jewish community, certainly there is a lack of civility in many cases. How do you think we should go about promoting that, working on it, figuring it out, whatever?
The single best way to promote civility is to be civil to someone when they're uncivil to you. I can't tell you how many times people have on Twitter or Facebook have written me angry comments and I respond unangrily and then they change. We tend to be more civil face to face online because the other person doesn't feel real and you don't see them. people allow their more aggressive impulses to take over and their reactivity to take over. But emotional issues are going to draw emotions. There's no way around it. It's just by modeling civility, I think we do our best. I don't know. I don't know that there's a way better than that. And part of the problem is if you are uncivil, you will get much more rewards in terms of attention and so on than if you're civil. If you think about Congress, it's all the people, or the Senate, it's all the people who are more extreme, who are more colorful, who say more cutting things, who are the ones that always get the camera right and left. And if you're a moderate congressman and you speak in, in moderated tones and you don't say anything outrageous, then nobody wants to talk to you. So it's partly a glitch in the system in the way evolution made us. We are biased towards negativity. And you understand why, of course, because the one thing you don't want to miss is the tiger, right? If you miss the piece of fruit, that's okay. You miss the tiger, you're dead. So we're biased towards negativity, fear, worry. It's why if I get up in front of my congregation, I talk about anti-Semitism, they'll all listen. Talk about Shabbos, not so much.
So true.
Not you, but just, yes.
Saba, and then Savta. We'll just.
Oh, okay, well, Nancy can go first if she wants. But my question is for the young generation, and I think it goes across conservative and reform synagogues, maybe more in reform, I don't know. But the young generation does not know the vulnerability that we have basically, and the importance of Israel in establishing our strength and our survival. Do you have any particular things that you advise rabbis to do or communities to do to try and get that point across, because it is crucial, even with this, disagreements on what Israel should do this or that or whatever.
The most important thing they can do is get their kids to visit Israel. And when you see where the Golan Heights are, and I mean, we can't, in America, we don't understand the distances. We just don't. And I spoke to a group of students from NYU Abu Dhabi, none of them Jewish. They were all students from NYU Abu Dhabi. And I said to them, why is America successful? And they gave a billion different answers, all of them wrong. I said, look, all the things you're saying, they're all true to some extent. But here's the biggest reason. Canada, Mexico, ocean. The Pacific never attacked us. And so you grow up in America with this complete fantasy about the way the rest of the world is. You think they're like us. And then you go to Israel and you go, by the way, that's Jordan right there. And if they had a missile and wanted to lob it, it would reach you where you're standing. And that's very helpful. That's one thing. And then the other thing is, and this is harder, we're not very good at studying history, in part because of that. In America, we don't really study history, so we don't have a sense of the past. And a sense of the past is really important to understand the vulnerability of the Jewish people and also of Israel.
Thank you. Okay, Sue and then Ellen. Mom, you're muted. Do you have a question? Okay.
I just wanted to add for the people on this call to understand. Hello, David, first of all.
Hi.
It's always a pleasure to see you. To understand how collaborative the rabbi has been with the reform movement, and that so many of our students quote you, and how collaborative you've been with the college. And I want to thank you for all of them and for all of us.
Thank you. First of all, I've had the great pleasure of addressing the graduates before and will again. And some of my best friends are reformed.
Thank you.
We won't
Thank
tell
you.
We'll keep that right within this area of Zoom. Shh. All right, Ellen, go ahead.
I defer. It's actually me.
Oh, sorry. I apologize. Ellen's name is on your Zoom box.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
thank you for being here. And the question I have is this: do you think that a national service act, where if you can serve in the military, fine. If you can't, you can serve in the public health service. Pick your one.
Yes.
Would be a big help to the United States.
I think I love that idea. I think this was one of the great tragedies, really tragedies of 9/11, was that George W. Bush, after 9/11, could have called for that, and people suggested it, and he didn't. And that was a moment of tremendous national mobilization, where he could have said everybody should give a year of service to their country. And I think it would have passed. And it would have helped. One of the things that it does in Israel is it lets people of different classes meet each other.
Yeah.
And that's so important. I mean, I grew up in Philadelphia. I never met someone who grew up on a farm until much later, because that wasn't my world. And at Penn, which is where I went to college, maybe a couple of people. It wasn't really till I went abroad. And that's too bad. And we know that different parts of America don't understand each other, in part because they don't mix with each other. So yeah, I would love that. I think that would be great.
I asked that question because I was so fortunate in 1964, early 64, to have been drafted. And when I was in basic training, I was old actually, because I had been to graduate school. I was 24. Everyone else was 18, 19 max. And I think, like you said, you meet people of a whole variety of backgrounds. You also learn what it means to deal with discipline. You also get an understanding of what a big one. So from my standpoint, that part of it was a valuable experience.
No, I think it would be great. I really do. I mean, look, I remember my father telling me that the single most important contributor to integration in the United States was World War II. He said, Peter, it was the first time people served together. It was a different world. And it would make, I think it would be better. It would be good. I don't know why there isn't any sort of concerted national effort to do that. I wish some politician would take that up as their cause, but I'm afraid that in an increasingly individual age, it would be harder and harder to get people to do it. But it would be good.
Yeah.
So
That's, by the way, one of the things that religion brings to the world that we desperately need, which is, you know, we have this epidemic of loneliness, unsurprisingly, and it got worse during the pandemic. And it doesn't exist nearly as much inside religious communities.
Well, and I think, I mean, you said to be Jewish is countercultural in and of itself here in America. The idea that you know, we are autonomous as Americans, and autonomy is flawed unto itself, and that defies the face of what it means to be, I think, part of a Jewish community.
Yeah.
Rabbi Kulik.
So we want to thank you, Rabbi Wolpe, for joining us. For, you know, it has been a great year with lots of speakers, insightful rabbis, and, you know, to close by reminding, you know, what you wrote in that book. But I think it's a great spiritual challenge for us as we are going into summer to think about, you know, becoming part of a larger community, larger than our own selves, to grow our spirits, to have a relationship with God. Sounds like an interesting homework to do in the upcoming months, as we try to figure out, as we try to make sure that we continue walking through this middle path, and we are not taken by any of the extremes that are so alluring and so calling, like sirens all around us. And we want to thank you for
Thank you. Sorry for the cough, but I appreciate your bearing with me, and I appreciate your asking me to be here.
Anytime.
Well, we wish you Fuah Shleima, that you could be gone quickly, and thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.